This video is on timed loops. So I'm going to start out with a simple time loop. And this is a loop. So basically, they're going to repeat whatever code is in the loop every 1 second. So keeping these simple, as we have with the other ones, I'm just going to console log the number 1 each time I run the time loop. So when I press run, if I look down at the console logs, I'm just going to see 1, and it's happening once per second. And it will keep going on forever, which is kind of hard to see, but you can see this is moving and getting smaller as long as that goes on. Now, naturally, you should wonder, okay, like if we only want it to happen a certain number of times, then what can we do? And since there is no I variable in here, basically we have to create a counter outside, and then we will run that loop until the counter reaches a certain value. So I'm going to call this variable counter. We'll start it at 0 outside of the loop, and then each time through the loop, I'm going to increase my counter by 1. And let's say I want to have this go 5 times. Okay, I'm going to clear this out and move it up so we can just see that a little better. So then in my loop, I need an if statement. So each time it's going to check and see if that counter is to 5. So if counter equals 5, then we're going to stop the time loop. So we would just expect for 5 seconds, it'll say 1, and then it'll stop. So our last time function, the one we haven't looked at yet in a video, is the stop time loop function. So here we should see it do that 5 times, and then the 5th time through the loop, when we get to counter equals 5, it should stop the time loop. So we're good, and then it stopped. Now, sometimes we have multiple timed loops going on at the same time. So I'm going to keep this one the same, but then I'm also going to bring in another timed loop. This one I'm going to have happen every 2 seconds, and I'm going to console log the number 2. So we're going to run it. And here you'll see, so it did 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. So we see the 1 is happening twice as often as the 2. But then when I got to 1, the 2 stopped also. Okay, so I didn't keep going with the 2, which you can see might be something you want to happen, but maybe you only want to stop 1 timed loop. So when we have these 2 timed loops, if you watched the last video on the set timeout function where we had to clear the timeout and name that with a variable, we can do the same thing with the timed loops. The stop time loop can have a parameter or an argument passed to it, or it cannot. It can go either way, whereas this clear timeout has to have a variable. So in order to handle that, I am going to go over to text, and I'm going to call this one, this time loop X, and this time loop Y. So they each have their own name. And I'm only going to stop time loop X here. So basically, it should continue saying 2, even though time loop 1 is going to, or time loop 1 is stopped. So we're going to go back over here. As I said, it's stopping this time loop, but not that time loop. So and we can see the 2 keeps going. Now, the last thing I just want to show is we could actually stop this one down there when the counter gets to 5. And actually, that's going to cause a little bit of trouble because it might not hit 5 because that one doesn't run as often. So I'm going to say if counter is greater than or equal to 5, just to make sure I get it, because this one might increase up to 6 before that one runs. So let's just see how that works. So in this loop, it should stop that loop. Move this down a little bit so we can see the full code. So let's just see what happens. So we'll see we got an extra 1 here. If I scrolled back up, I'd count 6 ones, and that's because this one ran twice before we found the counter being greater than or equal to 5. So I might want to stop one loop. I might want to stop another. Sometimes I do just want to stop all of them, but that's basically how we work with timed loops and stop time loop.